It began innocently enough, with small inconveniences that seemed more like bad luck than deliberate interference. A missing package here, a delayed delivery there. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself that shipping companies made mistakes all the time. After all, who hasn't had a delivery misrouted, left at the wrong door, or delayed in transit? But as the weeks passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Packages that tracking numbers confirmed had been delivered never actually made it to my doorstep. Items I had ordered, books, small household gadgets, even groceries, vanished into thin air. At first, I thought perhaps porch pirates had discovered my address. It wasn't uncommon in suburban neighborhoods, yet the circumstances felt different. The deliveries weren't random, they were precise, almost targeted. Whenever I ordered something slightly valuable, it seemed to disappear. Cheaper deliveries, like paper towels or laundry detergent, remained untouched. The selective nature of these thefts raised a troubling suspicion in my mind. Someone close, someone who knew what I was ordering, was watching. The thought lingered, like an itch I couldn't scratch, and soon my attention drifted to the house across the street. My neighbor, a woman whose reputation in the HOA had already earned her the unflattering nickname Karen, had a history of meddling in everyone's business. She had complained about lawn lengths, garden decorations, and the color of front doors. Nothing seemed to escape her scrutiny. I began to notice subtle things I had overlooked before. She was always outside at just the right time, watering her plants when deliveries were made, checking her mailbox whenever the UPS truck came down the street. Her eyes followed the delivery drivers as if she were cataloging every package. And though it might have been coincidence, her recycling bin seemed unusually full of Amazon boxes, with my apartment number faintly marked out by black marker. The more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't just porch piracy. This was theft carried out by someone who lived mere steps away, a person who believed herself untouchable. And worse, she carried herself with the smug confidence of someone who thought the HOA would shield her from consequences. I contacted the HOA, raising concerns about package theft in the neighborhood. Predictably, they dismissed it. "We can't police everyone's mail," they said. "You should invest in a security camera if you're worried." They spoke with the same condescending tone they always used when a resident dared to disrupt their perfect image of control. So I did. I bought a modest security camera, placed it discreetly above my porch, and waited. Within 2 days, my suspicions were confirmed. The footage showed her strolling casually across the street, glancing left and right before picking up a package from my doorstep. With practiced ease, she tucked it under her arm, turned without hesitation, and vanished back into her own house. It was so brazen, so casual, it was as if she believed she owned the entire block. Anger flared, but alongside it came a colder, sharper feeling. Opportunity. She wasn't just stealing, she was stealing from me, and now I had the evidence. It wasn't enough to simply confront her. That would end in denial, lies, and maybe even retaliation through the HOA. No, if she wanted to play this game, I needed to outsmart her, and that's when the idea began to take shape. If she loved stealing packages so much, maybe it was time to give her one worth stealing, something that would cost her far more than she ever expected. The seed of revenge had been planted, and with every passing day, it grew stronger. By the time the next package disappeared, I was already planning the perfect trap. The stage was set, and soon the petty thefts that had annoyed me for weeks would spiral into a disaster that Karen could never have predicted. The story of her downfall was only just beginning. After confirming my suspicions with the camera footage, I knew confrontation would be pointless. People like Karen never admit fault. She'd deny, twist the story, and somehow turn the HOA against me. That was her style. She thrived on manipulating rules, bending truth, and playing victim until others caved. No, direct conflict wasn't the answer. If I wanted justice, it had To be undeniable, humiliating, and above all, costly. I wanted her to feel the sting of every stolen package. The first step was research. I spent late nights online, reading stories of homeowners dealing with porch pirates and package thieves. From glitter bombs to fake deliveries, there were dozens of methods people had tried. But I didn't just want to embarrass her. I wanted a trap that would leave a lasting impact, something she couldn't laugh off or sweep under the rug. That's when I stumbled upon the idea that would become the centerpiece of my plan. A decoy package, carefully designed to look valuable but engineered to cause chaos once opened. Not in a dangerous way, of course. I wasn't trying to harm anyone. But I could create a financial and social mess so big that she'd regret ever setting foot on my porch. I ordered a set of plain, unused Amazon boxes from a supplier and went about crafting the bait. Inside, I placed layers of heavy filler to mimic the weight of electronics. Then, hidden within, I installed a small device designed to spray out an unavoidable foul-smelling dye the moment the box was opened. It was harmless, but it left a bright, neon stain that clung to skin, clothes, and anything it touched. It would take days to scrub off. To make the package irresistible, I carefully labeled it with "Electronics, handle with care," even adding fake shipping stickers to make it look authentic. The design was perfect. Anyone snooping from across the street would see it and assume it was worth hundreds, maybe even $1,000. But the trap wasn't complete yet. I needed more than a messy surprise. I needed evidence that would stick, something undeniable even in the eyes of the HOA. So I upgraded my security setup, adding a second hidden camera with a clear view of her front porch. That way, when she carried the box home, the theft would be captured from every angle. The anticipation grew with each step of preparation. It felt like I was building a stage for a grand performance, one where Karen would be the star of her own. Downfall. The day of the trap came faster than I expected. I placed the decoy box on my porch in plain view, angled perfectly for both cameras to capture the scene. The morning passed slowly, every sound of a car or footsteps making my heart race. And then, just as I predicted, she appeared. Karen strolled across the street with the same casual arrogance she always carried, eyes darting to make sure no one was watching. She bent down, scooped up the package, and walked away as if she owned it. The cameras caught everything. I almost laughed with glee, but the real payoff came later that evening. Through my second camera, I watched as she carried the box inside her house. A few minutes later, the faint sound of yelling echoed from across the street. The trap had sprung. When she reappeared, her hands and arms were stained with bright neon dye, glowing under the porch light. Her clothes were ruined, her hair streaked with splashes of the stuff. She looked like a character out of a cartoon explosion. And though I couldn't hear her exact words, her furious gestures told the story well enough. She had taken the bait, and now the evidence was undeniable. Still, this was only the beginning. The dye was a humiliation, sure, but it wasn't the real revenge. That part would come when the HOA, the very people she always weaponized against her neighbors, finally saw her for who she truly was. The trap had been sprung. Now it was time to deliver the final blow. The morning after the trap was sprung, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. It wasn't hard to see why. Karen had stormed outside to collect her mail, still streaked with stubborn patches of neon dye on her arms and clothes. No amount of scrubbing had erased the stain completely, and now it announced her guilt louder than any confession could. Neighbors noticed. They always did. A woman who once prided herself on being the self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood rules was now the subject of amused stares and barely disguised laughter. Some residents whispered behind hedges, others chuckled openly as she walked by. It was the kind of humiliation money couldn't buy back. But humiliation alone wasn't enough. I needed her exposed formally, stripped of the protection she thought the HOA gave her. So, I packaged the evidence, security footage of her stealing the decoy box, clips of her walking it into her house, and snapshots of her emerging later, drenched in neon dye. I compiled it all neatly and sent it to the HOA board, attaching a calm but pointed note. This is the neighbor responsible for ongoing package thefts. Please address this matter, as it affects the entire community. For days I waited, half expecting the HOA to ignore me like they always had, but this time was different. The evidence was undeniable, and the story had already begun spreading among residents. The board could no longer pretend nothing was happening. By the end of the week, Karen was summoned to an HOA meeting. Of course, she didn't go quietly. She arrived in her usual fashion, chin high, voice raised, demanding that she was the victim of a smear campaign. She insisted I had set her up, planted evidence, and targeted her unfairly. But the board had seen the footage. There she was on camera, strolling across the street, taking the package, and then returning to her home with it. Every detail captured, in crisp clarity. Her excuses fell flat. The more she ranted, the more foolish she looked, digging herself deeper into the hole she had created. The board issued her a formal violation. Notice, coupled with fines for theft and behavior unbecoming of a community member. It was poetic justice. The same HOA she had used as a weapon against others was now turning against her. Yet the most satisfying part was watching her face. When she realized she had no allies left, neighbors she once bullied refused to support her. People she once tattled on now smirked at her downfall. She was alone, exposed, and broke from the fines that began piling up. Still, Karen wasn't the type to give up easily. Pride and stubbornness ran too deep in her veins. Instead of accepting responsibility, she doubled down, insisting she was being framed. She stormed into HOA meetings, wrote angry letters, and even threatened to take the matter to court. What she didn't know was that I had planned for this too. Because while the HOA fines were damaging, I had another card to play, one that would cost her far more than money. For now, though, I let her rage. I let her stew in the embarrassment, the whispers, and the growing disdain of her neighbors. The trap had humiliated her, the HOA had turned on her, but the real revenge, the $1,000 surprise, was still waiting to be revealed. Her downfall was only halfway complete, and I was just getting started. Karen's humiliation should have been enough. But as the days passed, I realized something. People like her don't change after embarrassment. They only get angrier, more vindictive, and more determined to claw back control. And if I let her rage simmer unchecked, she'd find a way to make me pay for daring to expose her. So I decided to finish what I started. If she wanted to keep playing games, I would raise the stakes. And this time, it would cost her dearly. The idea for the $1,000 surprise came after reading through HOA bylaws late one evening. Hidden in the dense legal text was a section about theft and misconduct, stating that repeated violations could result not just in fines, but in restitution payments to affected homeowners. The wording was vague, but it was enough of a loophole for me to push through. I gathered every receipt from the packages that had gone missing. Electronics, home goods, books, even groceries. The total value shocked even me. Over the past few months, she had stolen well over $1,000 worth of deliveries. Each one, backed up with purchase records and shipping confirmations, painted a clear picture. She wasn't just a meddling neighbor. She was a serial thief. I presented the evidence to the HOA board, along with a formal request that restitution be enforced. I didn't shout or demand. I simply laid out the facts and asked them to uphold their own rules. The board couldn't ignore me this time. With neighbors already gossiping and video proof circulating quietly among residents, their credibility was on the line. To my satisfaction, they issued a formal notice to Karen. She was to repay the full amount of stolen goods, totaling just over $1,000, in addition to her mounting fines. The news hit her like a brick. Overnight, she went from smug neighborhood watchdog to financial liability. The woman who once threatened others with fines was now buried under them herself. Worse, word spread quickly. Neighbors she had bullied for years now laughed openly at her plight. People whispered about how the mighty had fallen and how it couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. Of course, Karen didn't take it quietly. She tried every excuse imaginable, claiming the packages were abandoned, insisting she thought they were misdelivered, even accusing me of planting them intentionally to entrap her. But the evidence was too strong. Video footage, timestamps, receipts, it all told the same story. And for once, the HOA wasn't on her side. When the repayment deadline arrived, she had no choice. Begrudgingly, she wrote a check to cover the stolen goods, the ink on her signature shaky with fury. To see her forced to pay back every cent she had tried to steal from me was satisfying beyond measure. But the best part, this wasn't just about money, it was about power. For years she had wielded the HOA as her personal weapon, making neighbors' lives miserable. Now, that same HOA had turned against her, demanding not only her dignity, but her dollars. She was humiliated, broke, and isolated. And yet I knew this wasn't the end, because people like Karen don't stop until they've destroyed themselves completely. And as her anger boiled, I could already sense her next move would be the one that finally unraveled everything she had left. For most people, the humiliation of being caught, fined, and forced to pay restitution would have been enough to end the feud. Most would have kept their head down, paid their dues, and prayed the neighborhood forgot about it. But Karen wasn't most people. Instead of accepting her punishment, she doubled down. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about pride. She couldn't bear the idea that her reputation, her control, and her carefully cultivated image as the guardian of the neighborhood had crumbled in front of everyone. She began her counterattack quietly at first. Anonymous notes slipped under my door, nasty little messages calling me a liar and a cheat. The words were meant to rattle me, but they only confirmed her desperation. When that didn't work, she escalated. False complaints were filed with the jar, accusations that my lawn was overgrown, that my trash cans weren't stored properly, that I violated noise ordinances. But this time, the HOA didn't bite. They had seen the footage, the receipts, and her dye-stained hands. They knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Each complaint was tossed aside, and with every rejection her anger grew hotter. Then came her boldest move yet. One afternoon, as I returned home from work, I found a letter taped to my front door. It was from Karen herself, written in dramatic, furious handwriting. She threatened to sue me for defamation, claiming I had orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation. She said she would take me to court for emotional damages and that I would regret ever crossing her. The threat might have shaken me if I didn't already know how hollow it was. Because here's the truth. Suing someone requires more than anger and pride. It requires money. And Karen had drained her resources, paying off fines, covering restitution, and battling the social fallout of her actions. She couldn't afford a legal fight, and she knew it. Still, her threats weren't without consequence. The tension in the neighborhood spiked again. Some neighbors avoided her entirely, while others openly mocked her attempts at revenge. Children whispered about the crazy package lady, and her once pristine image was nothing more than a punchline. It was around this time that karma finally dealt the final blow. In her desperation to lash out, Karen crossed a line even the HOA couldn't ignore. She attempted to tamper with my security camera one night, caught red-handed by a motion-activated spotlight that illuminated her like a deer in headlights. The footage was undeniable. There she was, sneaking onto my porch, fiddling with wires, trying to erase the very evidence that had condemned her. This time the HOA had no choice but to act decisively. Tampering with property, especially after repeated violations, was grounds for severe penalties. They convened an emergency meeting, and the decision was unanimous. Karen was to be removed from the HOA board, fined heavily once again, and placed on probation as a resident. The look on her face as the ruling was delivered was priceless. She had gone from neighborhood tyrant to disgraced outcast, stripped of the authority she once abused. For years, she had ruled with intimidation and complaints. Now she had no power, no allies, and no credibility left. And yet even then, I knew she still had one final move left in her, because pride like hers doesn't die quietly. The end of her reign was coming, but it would end with a collapse louder than anyone could have imagined. Karen's world was unraveling faster than she could hold it together. The HOA fines had gutted her savings. The restitution check had drained what little she had left, and the loss of her board position stripped her of the only authority she ever cared about. But still, she clung to her pride. Even after being caught tampering with my camera, she strutted around the neighborhood as if nothing had happened. She carried herself with the same fake superiority, though now it was met with rolled eyes, laughter, and closed doors. Neighbors who once cowered before her constant nitpicking now ignored her entirely. Her reign of petty power was over. The final blow came not from me, but from the very system she once relied on. You see, Karen's constant fines and legal threats had pushed her finances to the breaking point. She had spent years living beyond her means, and now, with debts piling higher and her reputation in ruins, the inevitable happened: foreclosure. The HOA records revealed it first. She had fallen behind on dues, thousands of dollars overdue. Without her steady harassment of others, she had no leverage to hide her own failures. And once the overdue payments were documented, the process moved quickly. She received notice after notice, each one colder and more final than the last. When the day came, the neighborhood watched silently as a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. Karen, red-faced and defeated, packed the remnants of her pride into cardboard boxes. Her once immaculate garden was overgrown, her porch littered with the remnants of dye stains that had never quite washed away. For years, she had weaponized the HOA to control others. Now, that same HOA had overseen her downfall. Neighbors stood at their windows, some whispering, others smiling, as the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac was forced to abdicate. By the time the truck drove away, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer. The tension that had hung over us for so long dissolved. People decorated their yards without fear of complaint. Children played outside without being scolded. The air felt different, as if a storm had finally passed. As for me, I felt no guilt, only relief. She had chosen this path, every step fueled by greed, arrogance, and spite. My trap may have started her downfall, but in the end it was her own pride that destroyed her, and that was the real $1,000 surprise. Not just the restitution she was forced to pay, but the cost of losing everything she thought she controlled. Karen had stolen packages. In return, she lost her money, her reputation, her home, and the very power she had abused for so long. Justice, it seemed, had a way of delivering itself, sometimes in the form of a single brightly wrapped box left waiting on a porch.